Hi, good morning. Brother Chad Long here from Delhi Baptist Church, and we are in James, the book of James. And we left off, I want to say, in verse 9, as we talked about having respect of persons. You know, the world's real interested in equality right now, and I think that's funny because the Lord's been teaching us since the very beginning, all the way back to Adam and Eve. The Lord's been teaching us how to treat one another with love and respect. So these people who think they're going to bring all this about now, we should have been doing it already. And if we haven't figured it out in 6,000 years, then we're not going to be able to do it on our own. We're going to have to trust the Lord for those things. But the Bible tells us in James 2 and 9, if you have respect to persons, you commit sin. The real problem we have in the world today is sin. When you look at all the issues going on, it's not a political party that's your enemy. I know the right wants to look at the left, and the left wants to look at the right, and I make no apologies for being a conservative Christian. But being real honest with you, my enemy is not a political party or members of it. My enemy is sin. And if we could eradicate sin, we wouldn't have any of these problems. One of these days, Jesus is going to do that for us, and until then, we all need to look at Him. One of these days, Jesus will eradicate all sin. He'll make all the crooked things straight, and He'll get all these things fixed, and we won't have any excuses after that. During the millennial reign, no one's going to have any excuse, and there's still going to be people who turn against Him. Anyway, I didn't mean to get on that, but James tells us that if you have respect to persons, meaning if you treat people differently, then you're a sinner. And I'm glad he makes that distinction, because some people get really self-righteous when they find that they're not, they don't tell lies, they don't steal, they haven't killed anyone, and they take care of their family, they pay their bills. I mean, by all accounts, they're good and godly people. I mean, there are folks who fit that mold who, while not sinless, seem relatively sinless because they don't really do a whole lot of wickedness outwardly. But they judge other people, and that's a sin too. And so James makes this distinction to let you know, no matter how godly you think you are, if you've committed a sin, you're a sinner. And we'll look more at that in a moment. But it reminds me of the rich young ruler. And some of you will remember this. There's several accounts of this. My favorite one, I think, is in Mark. And I don't remember which chapter and verse, but it's neither here nor there. You can look it up. It's pretty easy to find. But it's the rich young ruler. He runs up to Jesus. He says, "Lord, Lord, what must I do to be saved?" Which tells you right off, he knows he's not. You know, if you're asking how to be, then you realize that you're not. And that's good. That's a good step in the right direction, to recognize that you're lacking in something, and it'll go a long way toward finding it once you realize that you need it. You got to get somebody lost before you get them found. You got to let them understand that they're lost before they'll seek to be found. But anyway, the rich young ruler runs up to Jesus and he says, "Lord," or "Master," or however he words it, he says, "What must I do to be saved?" And of course, the Lord tells him, to start with, you need to keep the commandments. And he lists a few of them. Well, Jesus had a reason for telling him that I won't get into this morning. But the point is that he said, "Man, I've done all that." And he still knew. This is what's crazy about the story, is he still knew he needed to be saved, because he's asking Jesus how he might be saved. He says, "Man, all that I've done since my youth. I've done those things." And Jesus says, "One thing you lack." And he gets personal, because Jesus can do that with us. He can hit right at home to where we live, where we have our issue that needs to be addressed. You and I, we can't do that. We can't walk up to somebody and just immediately know what their need is. We just have to be a little more general and tell them, look, any of these things that you find that you fall short in, they show you your need for someone to fix that or to straighten that. So anyway, James says it this way: if you have respect to persons, you commit sin, and you're convinced that the law is transgressors. Verse 10. For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point is guilty of all. Now, I've often told people I've broken all 10 commandments. And since a lot of people don't know what they are, that doesn't freak anybody out too bad. But if you sit and think about it, you'll look at me a little differently. You'll say, wait a minute, okay, isn't there one there about murder? You're saying you broke all 10, well, you're a murderer? And of course, there's one there about adultery and lying and stealing, all those things. Taking God's name in vain and breaking the Sabbath. I mean, I'm not going to list all of them for you, but the point is, people will get to looking at that list and they're like, wait a minute, preacher, you're a murderer and a liar and a thief and an adulterer and you covet and you dishonor God. I mean, you do all those things, dishonor your parents. And yes, I've done all of those things. Now, I haven't physically killed anyone, but the Bible says to hate someone in your heart is to commit murder. So if you judge by God's standard, I have broken all of them. But even if I hadn't, what James is saying, if you've broken one, you just might as well have broken them all, because you need your sin taken care of. I mean, there's the wages of sin is death. The Bible tells us that. So the moment you sin against God, you're deserving of an eternal punishment. So it doesn't matter, and you shouldn't get puffed up and high-minded and think you're something if you've only struggled with one particular sin. And I'm telling you, this is relevant because there are people out there who think, well, I only have this one little pet sin that I do, and I'm pretty good other than that. So I don't need as much help as everybody else. And people think that. And that's a real problem. That's what makes people get high-minded and self-righteous and callous in their attitude toward other people. That's why there's so many quote-unquote racist and bigots in the world, because they think they're better than someone else because they may not struggle with what they're struggling with. Drugs and alcohol is a big one. There are people out there who think, well, if they're not a drunkard and they may have a drink now and then, but they're not a drunkard and they don't do drugs, well, then they're better than you. Well, that's not the way it is. James says if you keep all the law but offend in one point, you're guilty of all of it. You're guilty enough to be punished by God, because God is holy, and if you've broken any of the commandments, if you've sinned at all, then you are not holy. He says in verse 11, for he that said do not commit adultery said also do not kill. In other words, he said don't do any of these things. You know, the same God who said don't do any of these things, he doesn't do them. So if you're going to rub shoulders with him and think you're up there and elevated to that level, then you've got to be completely whole. And you can't be. The only way to be completely and totally sinless and holy is to have the blood of Jesus Christ applied to you. Well, as Christians, we know that. But I know some people that stumble on this video may not know that. So, anyway, James says, for he that said do not commit adultery said also do not kill. This is verse 11 of chapter 2. Now, if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law. Doesn't matter how you break the law. If you break it, you're a lawbreaker. And that's what he's saying. And the main point he was giving us was about bigotry and respect of persons and treating one person better than another. But this applies to anything. If all you've ever done is tell one little lie, you broke the law. Okay? So you have to address that. You won't like the penalty, so you better get an advocate. You know, it's so funny to me. If you get in trouble with the law tomorrow, you'll go hire a lawyer. Most of you. If you get in some kind of a bind with the law, you'll go get you a lawyer to advocate for you, to help you, to guide you, to try to get you through it. Yet, we find ourselves in trouble with God's law every day, and some people will not get their advocate. We need Jesus in every aspect of our lives every day. So keep that in mind. He says, do not commit adultery, do not kill, and if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law. Verse 12, so speak ye, and so do, is they that shall be judged by the law of liberty. In other words, even though living by the law doesn't save us, because we're saved, we ought to try to speak and do as though we were going to be judged by the law. We're not going to be. If you're saved, you're not going to be judged by the law. But you're still expected to try and keep it. You're still expected to do the best you can and not get high-minded and puffed up about it. It's one of the problems with trying to live a little holier is people start to think, well, I'm doing a better job at it than this guy over here, so I'm better than him. No, you're not. No, you're not. We ought to do the best we can anyway. But that's not for us to get high-minded and think we're something. Verse 13, and I'm going to close with this. He says, "For he shall have judgment," talking about God. Well, I'll read it and then I'll explain it because I'm not coming at this right. "For he shall have judgment without mercy that showed no mercy." This is talking about the person who's not had mercy is not going to receive any. "He shall have judgment without mercy that showed no mercy. And mercy rejoiceth against judgment." In other words, our glory is found in the mercy of God. And because we have the mercy of God, we ought to show mercy to others. See, God knew when he created us, there's no way we could be holy enough. So we shouldn't look down our noses at anyone else. Jesus tells a story, and I don't know where this is. I've read it many times. I couldn't tell you right where it is. But Jesus tells a story about a guy who, and I'm paraphrasing, but he owed a great sum of money to his boss. His boss was apparently, high and mighty, rich guy, some kind of a ruler, king, or whatever. And this guy was like a mid-level servant, and he had gotten way in debt. I don't know, betting on the horse races or something. But he owed him everything. And the king or ruler, whoever he was at a point where it was time to try to settle up, and he was never going to get his money back. There was just no. It was too astronomical a sum. He was never going to get his money back. And he considered it as options. I can put this guy in prison, take his wife and children, make them my slaves, let them start working off this debt that it'll take them a lifetime to pay, and they may never even come close. But I got to start, I got to cut my losses and start, working toward trying to recoup some of this that's owed to me. Well, he calls in the mid-level servant, and he says, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to arrest you, and I'm going to do this to your family." And the guy falls on his face and begs for mercy. He says, "Oh, don't do this to me. I'll just give me time. I'll pay you. I'll find a way. I'll come up with it. I'll do something." Well, the Lord of that place, he shows mercy. He says, "You know what? There's no way you could ever pay me back. I'll just forgive you the whole thing. Just forget about it." And so just having a good day, I guess, and wanted to show mercy to the guy, he lets him out of the debt. Well, that same mid-level servant goes and finds a low-level servant, somebody under him, that owed him just, I don't know, maybe a month's worth of wages or something. It was a small sum in comparison to what this mid-level guy had owed his master. But whatever it was a significant enough amount of money that the low-level servant didn't have it. And so this mid-level guy goes to him, grabs him by the throat, and says, "You're going to pay me all. You're going to pay me all now or else." And the guy says, "I don't have it." And so he has him arrested, and he takes possession of his family, and he starts trying to get his money out of them the way that king could have done him and didn't. He decides, now that he doesn't owe anyone, now that his debts are forgiven, and let me clarify, before he wasn't worried about it because it's like it wasn't going to help him anyway. If this low-level guy had paid him everything he owed him, it wasn't going to help him in his debt to his master, so it wasn't going to profit him any to receive any money. He probably wasn't worried about it. But now, he doesn't owe anyone. And he's gotten greedy. He's like, now I could use all that money that I'm owed because I don't have to give it to anyone else. I can keep it and start to build myself a fortune or whatever his thinking was. So he goes to this low-level guy, this lowly servant, and he puts him in prison and enslaves his family and starts trying to get his money out of him. Well, the king hears about it, the ruler, whoever he was. He hears about it. And he calls this guy and he says, "Didn't I forgive you your entire debt? And now you've taken this guy over here and shown no mercy to him?" um, now I'm going to give you what I should have gave you to start with. So anyway, that's what this verse is saying. He shall have judgment without mercy that hath showed no mercy. And mercy glories against judgment, or rejoiceth against judgment. Look, I'm going to close with that thought, but I want you to remember that we are to show mercy. So the main points: don't show respect to persons. Don't think you can keep the law. You can't. And don't judge other people that can't. Don't get high-minded. And realize that you're a sinner, that you're lost, and that you need the Lord. And then finally, show mercy, show love, and recognize that if you don't, then God won't. Don't expect God to show you mercy if you won't show others mercy. I wish more people understood that. We're going to answer for the things we do. There's a payday someday. Even as Christians whose sins have been forgiven, we're still going to have to stand before the Lord and give an account. There's still going to be the judgment seat of Christ where we're going to have to talk about some of the things we didn't do. So let's keep those things in mind, and let's try to have a wonderful day. God bless you. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't heard about our revival, we're having a revival this Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evening, and you're going to get fed, and we're going to have some singing and some praising and some worship, and we're going to hear a message from the Lord. So if you're not doing anything and you want to come out, we're going to host that at the Delhi Fire Department the 20th through the 23rd, and I hope you'll come and join us. All right, God bless you. Have a wonderful day.